Hello, and welcome to another edition of Mr. Lash's Digital Classroom. Today's lecture is on early modern political theory. Wow, that is an awful title. How about the origins of early modern political? Wow, no, that's worse. That's worse. How about something simple? Something simple. How about the birth of modern politics? Because that's what this lecture is about. It's about talking about where do our conceptions of modern politics come from, the way that we think about politics, the way that we break them down. Where do they come from? And they come from, it turns out, two men. The first is Thomas Hobbes, a British Enlightenment writer of the mid-17th century. And the other is John Locke. And that's the wrong John Locke. That's the character from the popular television show Lost. That's not right. There he is. That's John Locke that we're talking about. Enlightenment thinker and writer of the late 17th century. Now, between the two of these men, we can break down the modern conceptions of politics. But before we get into that too much, what we really need to look at is the social contract. Now, the social contract in its modern form was originally written by Hugo Grotius. And he based what he wrote mostly on classical thought, going all the way back to Socrates and Aristotle, because when you get right down to it, you just can't get away from the classical thinkers. However, it's Thomas Hobbes who popularized the concept of social contract in his popular work, The Leviathan. What the social contract argues is that humanity began in a state of nature. Its state of nature is wild, it's chaotic. It's a life that, as Thomas Hobbes described it as, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And it's this way because people are fighting one another. There are no laws, there are no rules. So if I want something, I'll just take it. And there's nothing you can do to stop me. There's no conceptions of legality in this situation. So humans came with a brilliant idea to band together, to form groups, collective groups, communities, whereby they can protect one another. So in doing this, they surrender some of that freedom, some of those absolute rights. So you no longer can just go around bashing somebody's head in because you feel like it. Now there's a rule. There are laws. You're civilized. You give up some rights for the safety and stability of civilization. But so what? Talk about the social contract and what does that mean to anyone? That's a fair point. So go ahead, take a second, pause this lecture, and I want you to go to the New York Times website or Politico or the Washington Post or any major paper of record. And when you go there, what I want you to do is find a major political issue. Maybe it's gun control. Maybe it's someone wanting to build an interstate. Maybe it's building schools, education reform. Whatever it is, go ahead, take a look at it. Take a second, hit pause, and read up on that issue. Just read an article. Go ahead. I'll be right here. Hit pause. Seriously, though. Go do it. Did you do it? No? Yes? All right. So you've got your political issue. Any political issue. Now, most political issues can be broken down into one of two ways of thinking about it. The first is that it's about the safety and security of the community. It's about protecting people, making them safe. The other side of it is that it's about the rights and freedoms of the individual. So, let's say your issue was gun control and regulation. Well, the safety and security of the community side of things is the limiting access to firearms prevents needless and pointless deaths and injuries. So by controlling people's access to guns, you cut down on the number of people that die of gunshots. Makes sense. The other side of that debate says that, hold on, not so fast, the rights and liberties to own a gun are guaranteed by the Second Amendment. I have that right. So here we have two fairly rational viewpoints. One saying, well, the safety and security of the community, society as a whole, requires that we limit access to these things. The other side saying that, but my rights and my individual liberties are being infringed upon. Now, maybe you're talking about building a highway. In that case, we're talking about, the safety and security and stability of that community by having access to transportation. At the same time, we have the rights of the individual to own that land that the government might be taking to turn into a highway and use that land for their purpose. So in most political issues, you can break it down to the community, the safety and security of the community, versus the rights and freedoms of the individual. But where do these ideas come from? The first is Thomas Hobbes and his Leviathan. Now, Hobbes was influenced by the chaos of the English Civil War. The English Civil War, you have the Parliament rebelling against the king being executed. This chaos literally sent Hobbes fleeing in exile to France. Because of that, Hobbes supports a very strong state. He believes in strength of the state over the rights of the individual. And the state has two purposes. The first is to protect the only right that really matters at the end of the day, the right to life. You have the right to be alive. Everything else, all the other powers of the state has to use that to keep itself in power. So right to land, right to happiness, right to walk in a park on a Sunday afternoon. All those rights can be taken away if the state feels that it threatens their existence, because the state's existence is what keeps your life from being nasty, brutish, and short. The viewpoint of Hobbes is countered by that of John Locke. Locke was strongly influenced by the absolutism of James II and VII, and not in a good way. He watched as James II and VII took rights from the individual, assumed control of the state. He had none of the experiences of chaos that Thomas Hobbes had. So instead, he had the experience of the state taking away the rights. And so his viewpoints on government reflect that. He believed that people had the right to life, liberty, and property, or as we say in the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But those rights are absolute. And the government, the state, exists to protect those rights. The rights to life, liberty, and property. It does that domestically through a police force, and it does that internationally through an army. But beyond those rights, the government has no other purpose to exist, and must refrain from using its power. And in fact, Locke believed that when the government stepped beyond that and started to infringe upon the rights of life, liberty, and property, it was at that point that people had the right to rebel. So if we go back to that idea of gun control one last time, we see that when it comes to safety and security of the community, that's a viewpoint that would have fallen in line with Thomas Hobbes. On the other hand, when we talk about the rights and freedoms of the individual, those are ideas espoused by John Locke. I hope that this lecture has helped you better understand not just politics in general, but where these ideas of politics come from. Namely, our idea of the social contract, and how that idea of the social contract influenced Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. Thank you.